Good morning, students. In today's tutorial, I am going to discuss to you very important topics from history. And there are 5 chapters in your history book, in which the first chapter is the rise of nationalism in Europe. So, the important points are, as you know very well, that slowly, the feeling of nationalism started to spread out in all over the European countries. In this series, during the 19th century, nationalism emerged as a force that brought changes in the political and mental thinking of Europe. And the development related to the concept of nation state with citizens having a common identity and shared history related to the some important factors which are very important to spread the feeling of nationalism. So first of all, many circumstances started in which the number one was the emergence of a new middle class which started question to the powers of monarchy. And after that, awareness started among the citizens of Europe, and the concept of liberalism also started to move out. Okay? After that, the attitude of the conservatives towards common people and the censorship imposed on the newspapers, books, and plays, songs, etc. Students, first of all, here I want to clear the meaning of liberalism. Liberalism has been derived from the Latin word liber, meaning free, and there are 2 types of liberalism started to spread all over the Europe, in which number one was political and the second was economic. Okay. After that, a number of revolutionaries like Giuseppe Mazzini started to write many ideas in their books related to the feeling of nationalism and the importance of liberty and the importance of democratic state or country. After that, the work of romantic artist and poet created a sense of collective heritage and common culture passed among the people. And after the economic hardship, whatever faced by the people in the form of food shortage and unemployment, etc., these are the factors and circumstances. So, the following methods were adopted to spread the feeling of nationalism in Europe. After that, in the 18th and 19th century, nations began to be portrayed as female figure called allegory. The French nation was referred to as Marigny and Germany as referred Germania. After that, in France, the ideas of la patrie, it means the fatherland, and les citoyens, it means the citizens, were promoted, emphasizing the nation of a united community enjoying equal rights under a one constitution. What will be related to the democratic ideas. So, after that, to spread the feeling of nationalism related to the nations, new hymns, oaths were composed and martyrs commemorated in the name of the nation. After that, a centralized administrative system was put in place. that formulated uniform laws for all citizens with its territories. And we are discussing about the growth of nationalist feeling among people, which are very responsible for the outbreak of revolutions all over the European countries. So, whatever we are discussing, all the above topics were related to the starting of revolutionary feeling all around the European countries, in which the first French Revolution in 1789 led to the transfer of sovereignty from the monarchy to a body of French citizens. And the French Revolution impacted the whole of Europe, and French armies were welcomed in Holland, Belgium, Switzerland, and Italy. But you know very well that initial enthusiasm turned into the hostility slowly, as France started promoting its individual interest. After that, in July 1830, in France, the Bourbon kings were overthrown by liberal revolutionaries who installed a constitutional monarchy. So, students, as I told you that in July 1830 in France, the Bourbon king were overthrown by liberals, group of revolutionaries who installed a constitutional monarchy with Louis Philippe as he was the head. But again, in 1848, due to economic hardship, people revolted against Louis Philippe and he was forced to flee. Finally, a national assembly proclaimed France a republic and granted suffrage to all males who are above 21 and guaranteed to the right to work. After that, in another part, Belgium broke away from the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, and a struggle for independence began among the Greeks in 1821. Okay? After that, Greece was recognized as an independent nation in 1832 by the Treaty of Constantinople. Again, in 1831, an armed rebellion against Russia was instigated by Poland. After that, in this series of the revolution, Prussia started the movement for national unification of Germany under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck. And finally, Germany was united in 1871 and William I became its emperor. Okay? After that, whatever revolutionary movement was started for unification of Italy. In this series, no British nation existed before the 18th century. After that, a long drawn out process comprising of wars and treaties resulted in the formation of British nation in 1801. So, by the last quarter of the 19th century, nationalism no longer retained its idealistic liberal democratic sentiment, but it became a narrow creed with limited ends. Finally, the European power manipulated the nationalist aspirations of people to further their own imperialistic aim. This was visible in the following instance. As I discussed to you, Balkan region covered Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Greece, Macedonia, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Slovenia, Serbia, and Montenegro. And a large part of this region, which was controlled by Ottoman Empire. After that, during the 19th century, one by one, these countries declared their independence and also hoped to gain more territory at the expense of others. Again, all these factors grew as a series of wars in the region, and finally it led the First World War, which was very devastating. Finally, many countries of the world which were colonized by European power began to oppose imperial domination, and thus anti-imperial movement developed to all over the Europe. So, on the basis of above, you can understand that how the feeling of nationalism in all over the Europe turned to make their country more strong after the annexation of number of states and empires, and this was responsible for the starting of First World War all around the world. All right, your next chapter is nationalism in India. So students, as you know very well that we are discussing about the idea of nationalism, the feeling of nationalism around the world. So your chapter number 2, nationalism of India, is related to the feeling and spreading of nationalist movement before the independence of India. So first of all, we have to clear what is the definition of nationalism. The definition of nationalism means the spread of ideas and belief in which the all part of the same nation bounded together by a common sense of belongingness. All right. So in India, when the First World War started, the Khilafat and the non-cooperation movement were the instrumental in shaping the nationalist movement in India. And you know very well that the First World War broke out in Europe and Britain in 1914. And these two countries were the active participant in it. And here in India, Mahatma Gandhi returned in January 1915 from South Africa and introduced a novel movement for fighting against the rule of Britishers and promoting nationalism among countrymen called Satyagraha. So, student, the meaning of Satyagraha is a movement which emphasized upon the power of truth. All right. After that, Gandhiji also launched a civil disobedience movement against the unjust laws of the Rowlatt Act with Hartal on 6 April 1919. And after 6 April, again in 13th April 1919, the famous Jallianwala Bagh massacre took place in Amritsar. And you know very well that when General Dyer blocked the exit point and fired indiscriminately on the people who had gathered to celebrate Baisakhi and protest against the repressive act of the government. So, against this action, whatever taken by General Dyer, Gandhiji called off the civil disobedience movement when violence spread after this incident. After some time later, Gandhiji convinced number of leaders in Calcutta session of Congress in September 1920 to start a non-cooperation movement for the support of nationalism with the help of Khalifa, and they demanded Swaraj. It means Poon Swaraj. You know very well that the book Hind Swaraj, written in 1909, in which Mahatma Gandhi declared that British could rule over India only because of the cooperation given by Indians. All right? So the non-cooperation movement started with middle class participation in towns, in cities, and it is started to spread from the cities to countryside, among the peasant, among the tribals, and among the plantation workers who were all dominated, tortured by the British policy and British rules and the British actions. After that, in February 1922, Gandhiji called off the non-cooperation movement because of violence at Chauri Chaura. And again in 31st January 1930, Gandhiji sent a letter to Viceroy Irwin enclosing 11 demands with an ultimatum that if the demands were not fulfilled by 11th March, the Congress would launch civil disobedience campaign. In this series, one of the most stringent demands was to abolish the tax on salt, which Lord Irwin was unwilling to negotiate. So when Lord Irwin refused the demands, Gandhiji started a march from Sabarmati Ashram and reached Dandi on 6 April. And he manufactured salt, and this marked the belonging of civil disobedience movement. After that, people started pro-colonial laws and boycotted British goods, and peasants refused to pay revenue and chowkidari taxes. Here, the British government attacked peaceful satyagrahis in which 1 lakh people were badly beaten and arrested. All right. Again, after this act, whatever taken by Britishers, Gandhiji called off the movement, and finally on 5th March 1931 signed the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. After this act, Gandhiji went to London in December 1931, but negotiations failed, and he returned finally in India. He found that the Congress had been declared illegal in India by the British rule. Again, this act, Gandhiji relaunched the civil disobedience movement, but again it was called off in 1934. Here, the civil disobedience movement was not supported by Dalits and Muslims, because in India, the feeling of the separation of different states on the basis of their religion start to demanded by the Muslims, and Dalits were against, because they knows that anyhow upper class Hindus are not in favor of giving equal right equally for the lower classes. That's why they are not supported and participated. And here farmers, businessmen, industrial workers, women, all participated in the civil disobedience movement in large number. So, nationalist movement spread when people belonging to different regions and communities began to develop a sense of collective belongingness. Here, the identity of a nation is started to symbolize by a figure in which the very famous figure was Bharat Mata. And this was first created by Bankingham Chandra Chattopadhyay in 1870 when he wrote Vande Mataram for the motherland. And during the movement of Swadeshi, a tricolor like red, green, yellow flag was designed in Bengal, having 8 lotuses representing 8 provinces and crescent moon representing Hindus and Muslims. So students, all are the important point related to the nationalism in India, in which 1921 Gandhiji had designed the Swaraj flag, and by the end of the 19th century, the citizens of India started feeling pride for the nation. So students, all the important points which you have to prepare for your upcoming examination from the chapter number 2. After that, your chapter number 3 is the making of a global world. In this topic, the important revision points are, you know very well that slowly the globalization started, in which the whole world is deemed to be one global village. But the present form of integration has a long history, which started from the pre-modern world. It means students, whatever globalization which we can see, in which all the things, good and services are available all around the country, which are coming from different parts of the world very easily. This was all not very easy task, because it has taken a lot of time, processes, and linking of the countries from one to another. So you know very well that in early starting of the 17th century and 18th century, you know very well that before a number of trade and business were going on between the eastern part of the world through India to the western part of the world. And in this series, trade linked the Indus Valley civilization with present-day West Asia and Maldives and China and the some countries of East Africa, etc., etc. In this series, the very important route, which is known as Silk Route, are also a very good example of vibrant pre-modern trade and culture, which links between distant part of the world. And these routes were made by the westbound Chinese silk cargoes or goods and services, which is connected from Asia with Europe and Northern Africa. And you know very well that food also offers many examples of long distance cultural exchange. Common food items such as potatoes, soya, groundnuts, tomatoes, etc. were introduced in Europe and Asia only after the discovery of America by the Columbus. So students, after potato was introduced in Europe, Ireland's and poor peasants became so dependent that when disease destroyed the potato crop, and 100,000 died due to starvation. By the mid-16th century, the Spanish and Portuguese had conquered and colonized America and spread deadly smallpox germ for the conquest. And here in 18th century, sugar and cotton plantations sprung up in America. In these plantations, work was done by slaves, which all were captured from Africa. You know very well that Africa was very poor at that time. So whatever economics identify the three types of flows within the country, which was responsible for the making of global world or globalization. That was the flow of trade, flow of labor, and flow of capital. It means trade and movement of labor and movement of money started to move up from one continent to another continent. And these three flows are very important and responsible for the making of global world and starting of globalization. You know very well that from the late 18th century, population also started to develop and grow, and they started to more food and grains to feed themselves in the Britain. So the expansion of urban centers and industries pushed up for food grains prices. And here the government restricted the import of corn under pressure from landed groups, and the laws that allowed the government for this came to be called as corn laws. This point is very important. After that, industries and urban dwellers forced the abolition of corn laws due to high food prices, and this was result the scrapping of these laws. So, with this, food could be imported into Britain more cheaply than it could be produced within the country. And students in between 1820 and 1914, world trade multiplied approximately 25 to 40 times. And slowly, technological improvement, which was very important to integrate the world economy from one to another, like introduction of deep freezers and number of medicines, etc., etc. So, finally, in the late 19th century, colonialism also increased. Britain and France made vast addition for overseas trade and Belgium. And in this series, Belgium and Germany and US became new colonial power. But in another part of the world, Rinderpest is one example of the destructive impact of colonialism on the economy and livelihood of colonized people, because it was devastated all the cattle of East Africa. And this disease carried by infected cattle imported from British Asia to feed the Italian soldier, which were responsible for the spread of this disease in East Africa. So, students, this period was also a period of great misery and hardship. Student, we are discussing about the development related to the trade and business and movement of labor, trade and money from one country to another country. But this era was also responsible for great misery and hardship around the country. So, you know very well that the main destination of Indian indentured labor who were migrants were the Caribbean island and Mauritius and Fiji. So, from the 1900, Indian nationalist leaders began opposing the system of indentured labor migration, which was abusive and cruel. Finally, this system was abolished in 1921. And here you know very well that in 1914 to 18, First World War was fought between two power blocs. On the one side were Allies which were comprising Britain, France, Russia, and the US. And on the opposite side were the Central Powers comprising of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Ottoman Turkey. After that, this war resulted a great economic crisis for all the nations, especially for Britain. And the Great Depression began in 1929 and lasted till mid 1930s in the US. And due to this Great Depression, which was started, it was responsible for the badly adversely affected all the countries of the world. After some time later, the Second World War broke out, and after 2 decades of First World War, and it was fought between Axis power comprising of Nazi Germany, Italy and Japan, and the Allies power comprising of Britain, France, Soviet Union and the US. So students, you know very well that this war caused severe loss to life and property. To ensure post-war development, the very important IMF or International Monetary Fund and World Bank were established. Finally, after the Second World War, the colonies of Asia and Africa gained independence. And these countries organized themselves as G77 and demanded a new international economic order, NIEO. And finally, in the 1960s, the Bretton Woods system collapsed and floating exchange rate system was introduced. And also industries were relocated to low-wage countries to make more and more profit. So students, you can see nowadays a number of multinational corporations or companies working in India and many developing countries of the world to make more and more profit and also to provide employment and to improve the economic condition of different countries of the world. So some group of the people like developed countries or the member of developed countries are in one side and the member of developing countries are in one side, because according to the members of developing countries, whatever rules and regulations made by the WTO, that is not good and very beneficial for the developing countries. All right, so all these important points were related to the making of the global world. Okay.